All right. Well, we are doing a quick conversation. Hello, hello, hello to everyone who is watching us. We are doing a quick conversation about how to recover from burnout. So, this is your first time catching one of our videos. My name is Calvalyn Day. I'm Director of Operations here at The Well. And I have with me the fabulous, the incomparable LaKeisha Johnson, who is one of our newest clinicians. LaKeisha, introduce yourself a little bit for the people so they can get to know who you are and what you're all about.
Hey everybody. Yes, my name is LaKeisha Johnson. Like Calvin shared, I am one of the newest therapists here at the Well. I'm super excited to be a part of the team. Some of the things that I kind of specialize in is life transitions, anxiety, depression, codependency, different things along that line. So yeah, I'm just excited to discuss burnout today.
Yeah, and so you guys, this is a conversation that LaKeisha and I started. I guess it was a few weeks ago now. We
Yeah.
started this a few weeks ago when we had the an opportunity to be a part of the Exhale podcast with Karen Vaughn that was taped down in Indianapolis during the Black Expo weekend. So we had this conversation about burnout, and I thought this is just such a good conversation. We need to go a little further with this. We
Yeah.
need to do a little bit more because I really think it's a conversation, guys, that oftentimes we are kind of having separately. We're kind of having that periodically. Um, maybe in this little pocket and that little pocket, but we're not having that conversation out in the open. And so everybody's kind of suffering in silence in their own little space. And so I thought we could have a little bit more conversation about this and talk to you also about some of the things that can benefit you from the mental health perspective, from the counseling perspective, things that we can help you with at our office. But also there are things that you can be doing right now, today, in your own home, in your own situation. So we are going to answer just a few kind of the most common questions that we sometimes get. If you are watching the recording of this video and you have other questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments because we'll pop back in periodically and check those comments. You also have the option wherever you happen to be watching this, whether it be on YouTube or Facebook, feel free to also send us a message because we do check our messages and we kind of, we'll be able to give you some feedback there. And we'll definitely make sure we give you some contact information at the end of today too. So, Keisha, what are some of the most common signs and symptoms? Like we kind of know about burnout, but so I want to give you like some general things, but I also really want to make sure that we highlight, particularly now during Minority Mental Health Month, some of the ways that burnout can actually show up a little bit differently for people of color, women of color. So what are some of those signs and symptoms that we might see in ourselves or in others when they're really getting a little crispy around the edges?
Yeah. I think the top two things that immediately come to my mind is irritability, and short-tempered.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as African American women, sometimes people are already look at us like, oh, she got an attitude, right? So when we are experiencing burnout and we're allowing ourselves to be consumed by doing all the things and we're not really tending to ourselves, sometimes the result of us choosing to neglect the way that we feel about being burned out will show up in us being irritable, and it will show up in us being short-tempered. And when those things start to happen, it can affect our intimate relationships with our partners. It can affect how we interact with our children if you have children. It can affect how we're showing up at work and interacting with coworkers and our bosses, and different things like that. So I would say, as far as mood goes, the irritability, and then being short-tempered are the first two things that come to my mind. But even thinking about some of the physical components that kind of show up when it comes to experiencing burnout, the fatigue, feeling super tired and exhausted all the time. You can start to experience headaches. You can start to experience body aches, stomach aches, different things like that. So I think that we not only have to be mindful of our mood and our behaviors, but we also have to be very cognizant on what's happening within our minds and what's happening within our bodies as well.
Oh, such a good point. And you had a post that I actually shared from our page earlier today that I thought was a really good point. And I
Yeah.
think it's a really good point because sometimes we have this idea that when you are being kind or being loving, that means you're supposed to mute your feelings. But
Yeah.
I think this is a really good point. So you said therapy tip on a Tuesday. Emotions are direct indicators of unmet needs. Identifying your emotions help you give language and explanation to not just what you are feeling, but why you are feeling it. And as it relates to burnout, I think that's so key. Like when we get mad, and sometimes what'll happen is you get mad, you kind of explode, you blow up on people, then you feel guilty, then you feel embarrassed, then you feel ashamed. So you try to make up for that or you apologize for that. But the thing that was actually causing that explosion is still actually there.
You
So I think
didn't
that
address it,
was
so
such
it's
a
gonna
good
happen
point.
again. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it sets you up for it to happen again.
Yeah, and like you said, sometimes we'll get to the point where we'll experience the regret piece,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll feel guilty and we'll feel ashamed for the outbursts or the explosion of our emotions,
Yeah.
that we just had. But if you don't change your behaviors and get to the root cause of where that outburst even came from, then it's going to be a continuous cycle, and you're going to be right back at the same point again. Um,
Absolutely.
so, and then like we say so much about not suppressing, but people
Mm-hmm.
throw that word around all the time, and it's like we using the word, but are we really gonna do something with it? Like
Right.
we cannot continue to suppress our emotions and suppress our feelings, because again, when we do that, eventually it gets to the point where we're gonna explode and we're gonna have these outbursts, and then we'll experience the guilt, and that's a whole nother conversation, a whole nother thing that you got to address on top of the burnout.
Right, which I think actually kind of goes into our second question, which is why does it feel like burnout is just the norm? Like it's the normal thing.
Yeah.
And I think you had a really good point there, which is because we're not actually addressing those root causes, because we're not actually dealing with the thing, what ends up happening is it becomes like a cycle. So what are some of the things like in terms of like the clients that you work with where you're saying like they feel like they almost like if I'm saying, I don't know how to get out of this, like it just feels like this is just life right now. Life is just lifing. This is just what it is.
Mhm.
What do you say to people when they say that?
This is crazy because I literally have talked about this multiple times today
Oh
with
my God.
clients. Yeah. So the number one thing that I've realized is that the society that we live in is just like a do culture, if that makes sense. Like
Mm-hmm.
our value is defined in what I can accomplish and in what I can do. So we
Mm-hmm.
already live in a society that makes us feel as if I'm not overachieving, or if I'm not helping and you on top of helping myself, then I'm not valuable. So because we have allowed society, yes, it's not our fault that society painted this picture, but we don't have to give in to what society says
Mm-hmm.
are, right? So because we have allowed ourselves to feel like we need to meet and live up to the expectations of society, burnout has become a norm because we constantly feel like we have to do this, we have to do that, we have to accomplish. I can rest when I get rich, or I can rest when I accomplish this. Like
Yep. Yep.
that is not a thing. Like you're gonna get to the point where you feel like you're accomplished and not even be able to enjoy your accomplishments because you did not value rest.
Right.
So at the end of the day, I feel like it's become a norm because, like you said, we don't get to the root cause and the root reason of why we feel the way that we do feel. So it becomes just a continuous cycle over and over again. But also, instead of us kind of just living up to what we feel like our capacity is, we
Okay.
try to live up to what society has said we need to do as far as accomplishing different things.
So what, so let's say that somebody is saying like, okay, I hear you. I hear
Mhm.
what you're saying. This sounds good. What would be something that you would say like, this is the first thing that I want you to really try, or like, what would you suggest for them to do?
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind with that specifically is boundaries. And
Mm, let's
everybody that
talk
knows
about it.
me, I'm not gonna lie, everybody that knows me, my clients that know me, that work with me, know that I cannot stand the word boundaries. And
Oh, really?
it's crazy because like we use it so much, but
Mm-hmm.
I feel like because we use it so much, people don't really see the value in the boundary. They don't see the weight that it holds, I guess I would say. Um,
Okay.
so for me, I tell my clients, yes, I understand that a goal for you is to create a boundary, but let's not call it a boundary. Let's call it a non-negotiable.
Mm.
because once you call it a non-negotiable, it sets it in stone a little bit more. It becomes
Gotcha.
a lot more concrete
Gotcha.
because in your mind, it's like, yeah, no, we're not doing that, right? If I'm telling you yes to something and it's going against what my values, my morals, and my non-negotiables are, then
Right.
that means that I'm not being committed to the goal that I set to start to create boundaries.
Right.
So it goes back to, of course, setting the boundaries, setting the non-negotiables, and even aside from that, like thinking about practical things that we can do. Create a schedule.
Mm-hmm.
You create a schedule. I remember you brought that up when we were doing the podcast with Karen. Create a schedule, pencil in specific time for you to do specific things, but also pencil in time for you to rest and do nothing and just be in the state of being.
Right.
And like we talked about, like it's difficult for a lot of people to just be in the state of being and not doing anything because it's like I'm constantly always on the go. I'm constantly always on the move. So when I'm sitting still, I feel weird. It makes me uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know
Mm-hmm.
how to just sit with me not doing anything. And the thing is for us to even get to a natural state of rest, we have to first understand how we can embody being just in a state of rest and in the state
Right.
of yeah.
You know what? That's a really good point because I think a lot of us were conditioned, and I'm going to speak. I'm going to talk about Black people, right?
Yeah,
Um, we are like hate the word lazy. We like we hate
literally.
to think about like it's almost like it's like the consummate insult to call
Yeah, like
somebody
don't look at me.
lazy. You're so lazy and trifling, you know, like we are so averse to that concept that we will overwork ourselves into an early grave, literally. And if you want to go all the way to kind of the root of that, like going back to the root of that, that was passed down from
Yeah,
generation to generation. It used to be that if you weren't showing your value and being productive, that you could actually lose your life. Well,
yeah,
now we are in this flip side of it, right? Which is if you are constantly overworking and trying to show up and be perfect and do all the things and, you know, be an overachiever and doing the most, that actually sets you up to literally work yourself into a grave. So when we talk about like where some of this stuff comes from, some of it is so deeply rooted. I think that's really why people don't understand, like, well, what is therapy gonna do? I still
yeah,
got all this stuff to do. I still got all this, like,
yep.
right. Therapy is gonna help you identify what's at that root. What's
Mhm.
the real reason why you keep signing up for every single volunteer shift at the church? I'm not
Literally.
telling you not to give your time. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
but you have to be on every committee, right?
Mhm.
And then when you come home, you can't get along with your husband. You don't have patience for your kids. It's because you feel an obligation to do all that extra work. And that is deeply rooted. And sometimes it's going to take more than just saying, like, well, I should set a boundary. It's going
Yeah.
to be sitting with your therapist, having those conversations, talking about like what comes up. Like sometimes I'll, you know, obviously my sister's a therapist, but so
Mhm.
sometimes we'll be talking, it's like, ooh, and I'll be like, ooh, I'm feeling some resistance. Where is this coming from? Like, you're like, oh, I just feel that, you know. But if you're not making space for those conversations,
Mhm.
sometimes you miss the fact that this is like a place where some really deep healing can occur. This is a place
Absolutely.
where some growth can occur. But
Mhm.
having that, like, oh, this is my hour once a week, once every other week, where I really say, like, here's where this conversation can happen, because maybe that conversation is not happening anywhere else. When we talk about like strategies and practices and things that you can do, chances are you have a lot of people in your life who have been conditioned and are very comfortable with the level of overworking that you're doing.
Absolutely.
And so you
Because
need
it's
at least,
benefiting them.
yes, you need at least one person in your life who's going to say, girl, now you know.
Literally. Like please
So
relax.
you know what I mean? And I think that's why sometimes when you're having that conversation with your therapist, your coach, what have you, it doesn't have to always be about the nuts and bolts of like, this is anxiety, this is depression, this is life. And how do
Literally.
we make sure we're living it?
Mhm.
So what are some of the things that, like, when we talk about like setting yourself up for success, that can help you maybe prevent burnout? And I really would love to kind of get some suggestions from you as we are like ending the summer and we're getting ready to transition into the fall. And if you have, you know, when people have children and they have like, you know, we start that usually like around October, November, it's like the extended family stuff, all that stuff starts to come in. What can somebody be doing like right now to set yourself up to not be burnt out for the rest of the year?
Absolutely. I would say identifying what your capacities are. And,
Mm.
and the tough thing about identifying what your capacities are is you got to be pushed past your capacity first to be able to identify what that is and what it looks like.
Yeah.
But again, like when you're experiencing burnout, that is what your capacity is. You're beyond your capacity limit. So I think that it gets to a point where, number one, when we're identifying our capacities, we have to be honest with ourselves first. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot be honest with somebody else and be able to kind of set a boundary or set a non-negotiable if you don't even know why you set in the boundary or the non-negotiable. So it starts with you being honest with yourself. Can I do this? Can
Right.
I show up for this event? Can I show up for this person? Sometimes even when it comes to family, like I'm all for identifying and addressing our emotions and our feelings, right? That's something that we are 100% supposed to do. But sometimes it gets to the point where we identify and address our emotions and feelings, and then it cripples us
Mm.
because the feelings and the emotions can be so overwhelming that we start to allow people to guilt trip us into making us
Mm.
feel as if we need to do this,
Right.
because it's like I can just go ahead and put my sanity and my peace on the line so I can just show up for you, and then I won't have to hear your mouth about not coming,
Right.
or I won't have to get any backlash or feel bad or guilty about not showing up. I would rather allow myself to be exhausted and tired and burnt out than make you feel uncomfortable. That
Right.
is not the correct mindset to have at all. So
Right.
again, it's us being honest with ourselves first. And then once we're honest with ourselves, then we could be honest with other people. And I feel like the honesty and then valuing our morals and
Mm.
valuing our yes and our no is also going to help us identify what our capacities are. Because it could get to the point where different seasons of your life require different things out of you.
Right.
So, like in one season, I may be super busy having to take my kids to this place, busy at work, busy with ministry, like busy with all the different things. So I cannot show up in one specific area in that season of my life. But then maybe in this season, say for instance, I have like a niece and nephew that are in sports.
Mm.
Okay, that season of sports is over with. So the time where I may have been at their games, like that time is freed up now. So
Right.
I may have a little bit more space to where I can fit something else into my schedule.
Right.
So it's being able to identify what does this season of my life require out of me right now, and then having the ability and the flexibility to be able to shift and transition and adapt when those seasons change.
Absolutely. And that when you talked about the seasons, I think that is so, so important because what I have found is that sometimes that season will change on you and you have not paid attention to it and then
Yeah,
you run over by the season. It's like,
literally.
oh, I wasn't expecting this, right? But and that's where again, having that consistent time where you're like, hey, I'm just going to sit down and look at my schedule. I'm just going to sit down and plan this out. I'm going to, whether it be like this is my Sunday evening ritual or my end of the week Friday before, like, so I can completely psychologically detach from work. I'm going to look at what I have coming up next week on Friday, and then I'm not going to think about it over the weekend. So kind of looking ahead to even like, what's my season this week? What's my season this month? When my kids were younger, so I have 4 kids. And when my kids were younger, I would be like, you get one sport and one activity at a time. That's it. Because that's what I have the capacity to do financially without making myself crazy and logistically. Because if it's 4 kids and y'all each got 2 things, that means I'm responsible for 8 things every single week. So a lot of times we just kind of take things like randomly. Oh, so
Yep.
and so needs this, so and so needs that, so and so needs that. And you haven't counted up the cost of all of those
That's the
compared to what's
cost.
going on with the
Yep.
rest of your life. And sometimes, like with work, that might be different. Like if I was an accountant, for example, the season between January and April 15th, that's not a time for me to pick up anything extra.
Absolutely.
But maybe in June, I'm good. I can handle that. So just being really clear about that, your yes should be your yes and your no should be your no. But I think sometimes we can feel a little bit better if we realize like it doesn't have to always be that way. But it's like
Yeah.
give yourself the grace of like, in this season, this is a no.
Yeah.
In this season, this is a yes.
Yeah. So like you said, honoring your yes and your no, because when we vocalize what our yes and our no is, that's us making a commitment to ourselves, right? So like stay committed to what you're saying, but also don't feel as if like it's set in stone. Again, like as seasons change, you gotta change. You gotta be able to adapt. And I think a lot of times, especially within the African American community, we get so caught up into the routine of things.
Mm-hmm.
So when a small minor inconvenience happens, it's so difficult for us to be able to readjust. Like we think the world is ending. Like, no, it is a great character trait to be able to have adaptability and to be able to make smooth transitions. So
And I think you're spot on as far as like when we give ourselves that room, like we talked about on the podcast, like that white space of like, hey, I'm not scheduling every single minute of the day. Like sometimes like, my kids will be like, well, what do you have to do? Nothing. I have to do
literally,
nothing. And that's exactly why nothing is getting added to my calendar right there, because that's a nothing spot. Like,
yes,
and for me, I have all daughters, right? So for me, some of that is like super intentional. I'm trying to train you to not live the mistakes that I lived early on in my life, so that you
absolutely,
don't have to get 45 or 55 or 65 and be like, oh, I wish I would have. No, there is no requirement for me to be busy 24/7.
absolutely.
The fact that I have nothing to do this Saturday is absolutely amazing. And I don't have to do not one extra thing. I don't owe anybody any time. I don't
Mhm,
have to fill that up. And I honestly didn't always have that. Like I
mhm,
always felt like, oh, I got the day off. I better do something with the kids. Me to
mhm.
turn this house into a playground. No,
Yeah.
y'all can be bored. You will be okay. You will be okay. So I think that's a really good point. Now, that's something we're doing personally, but let's say that you're like a pastor or a supervisor, or you own a business. What can we be doing like as a collective to kind of normalize this idea that we shouldn't have this burnout? Like what can we do like as a protective for, each other? What should we be doing that way?
Accountability partners and leading by example.
Mm,
I think especially when it comes to people who are like in charge of businesses, people who are pastors, people who are in leadership roles, different things like that. Sometimes because we get so caught up into the busyness of our call and the busyness of our job, we forget that there's a flock of people that are paying attention to our every move,
right, right.
literally. And even sometimes the pressure of realizing that people are paying attention to your every move can cause you to experience burnout too if you don't know how to manage it or handle it in the correct way. So and another thing is being able to depend on the people that are a part of your team. Don't
Mhm.
have to embody this hyper independence, like I can do it, I don't need your help. No, like we are called to be in community for a reason because we're not supposed to handle everything on our own. My capacity level is not the same as your capacity level. My gifts and my talents aren't the same as your gifts and talents. You do this well, so I'm gonna let you do this, and then I'm gonna focus on what I can do over here, and I'm gonna release the things that I cannot control.
Now,
So,
what would you say about so like and I don't want to cut you off, but like
oh, you're
for
fine.
somebody who's saying like I don't have a team, I don't
Mhm.
have a community, like 'cause that's something I see people say a lot. Like I don't, like where they say like where's the village? If you
Mhm.
don't have a team or the community that you do have is maybe not as supportive, what would you say to people with that concern?
Yeah, I think, and we should touch on that a little bit with the podcast too. And I myself, I'm all for sharing my own little testimonies. I don't mind,
Mhm.
but um, as you go through different things in life and go through different seasons and start to experience different things, like your community is gonna change, right? And community doesn't always have to be, oh, you my bestie, we kick it every
Mm,
single weekend. Like, no, that and community also does not mean that we're super close friends and I'm just going to enable everything that you're doing. I'm going to enable the fact that you are consistently burnt out.
right.
Community can also look like, oh, I have a coworker at work that I feel like I can confide in or trust in. That can be a part of community. Or I have somebody that I sit next to consistently at church every single Sunday.
Yep.
And yet that can be a part of community as well. Or I have at least a cousin or a sister or a brother. We may not be super, super close, but I know that I may be able to potentially depend on them. I think it starts with us having the confidence to be able to open ourselves up to building community. Because a lot of times we see that people who are consistently in the routine of working and doing, we look up and it's like, oh, I ain't really had like no social interaction with nobody, or went out and just like had fun or went to dinner or something like that, did an activity in a long time. And then we wonder where our community is at. And it's like you're so like caught up into the busyness of life that you are completely forgetting about the fact that you are human, and
Yeah.
a vital part of you being human is needing social connection and interaction.
Right.
So I think it goes back to the fact that we have to slow down,
Mhm.
and we have to again take the time, pencil in that time where we either aren't going to do anything, or we're going to pencil in the time where, okay, I'm going to allow myself to open up. I'm going to go to a social setting. I'm going to meet new people. And even if it's at church or if it's at work, a small, hey girl, your shirt is cute. Like something
Yeah.
simple as that can be a conversation starter that helps you to begin to build community. Um, but even with that, like I think that we also have to be very mindful of the people that we call our community.
Mm.
Because sometimes it's like we want community so bad that we just willing to go to anybody
Mm.
and talk about our concerns and express our feelings and our emotions. And I tell people all the time, like our feelings and our emotions are sacred. Everybody does not have the capacity to handle the way that you feel, because that person
Mhm.
may not be called to you. I
Right.
believe that community and friendship is something that is called to you. Those people are like your safe space. So don't be that person to where you're like desperate for community or desperate for friendships, where you're just going and putting your trust into anybody, because at the end of the day, that's gonna leave you worse off than what you already were. So I think it definitely goes back to the slowing down thing, making sure that you are allowing yourself to pencil in time to be involved in community, even if it means, okay, the whole running club thing is like the
Mm.
the new activity that everybody is doing. So if you're
I
somebody
mean, but that's okay. That's a
so
girl.
if you're somebody that enjoys physical exercise, physical activity, and you've been seeking community and friendship, find a running club that you can join and go and do that, so that you're able to build that community and also be engaged in an activity that will also help you to release some of those feelings of being burnt out.
You know what? It's you have such a good point, because the word that I wrote down while you were talking is redefine. We have to redefine what community means, redefine what family means, redefine what support means. And maybe the definition, like a lot of times people are like, well, my mama had this and my dad, you don't have your mom and daddy's life. So you're going to have
Yeah,
to define that for yourself. Maybe that was their story, but that's not your
that's
story.
not for you.
You got to figure out how to define that for yourself. And it's okay if it doesn't look exactly the same. And the second thing I wrote down is when you were talking about like running club, I'm like, I'm not running. But so there was so during the pandemic, I was like newly separated in the middle of a divorce. I had moved to a new city, and then the pandemic happened. And I'm like, who is my community? Who are my people? Like, and in the community that I live in, we have something called Dance Fit. And during the pandemic, we danced in a parking lot outside. And so it was not, listen, y'all, that was not nothing that this, like, if you knew me before, like, if you know me in real life, you're like, you did what? She danced in the parking lot with strangers. But it was so amazing because it was like, 55, 60 minutes or whatever of just giving myself those endorphins, looking at the woman next to me like, girl, are you alive? Okay, we still alive. Let's
Right.
go. You know, and these were people I didn't know. I had never met any of these people. Over, a couple of years' time, I said, oh, I'm like, oh, now I'm seeing this person at the grocery store. And now I'm seeing this person at my kid's school. I didn't realize you had a seventh grader, like those kind of things. But it took me saying, I'm going to do this new thing
Yep.
that is different than what I've ever done before, that doesn't exactly feel like me,
Yep.
but there's something about this that sounds like it's going to be good. Now, I wasn't burnt out at that time, But for people who sometimes are experiencing burnout, the extra feels like just one more thing I can't do. You know,
Yep.
it's like, I don't have nothing left to give. But sometimes the way to actually recover from burnout is to give yourself the thing that you were missing to begin with. And then
Yep.
once your body gets those positive neurochemicals and you start to experience that joy and that anticipation and that hope, then you can start, it becomes a little bit easier to say no or to set those boundaries or what have you, because you've given yourself some things that you can do. So it is about like redefining what it means to have community and support. And it may not, like some of these women I danced with at Dance Fit, we have never like, we've never had broken bread together, what have you, but like
Yeah.
if I saw them at the grocery store, it's like, hey girl, you know, because there is a different sense of community. Now, obviously, I'm not telling them all my deepest, darkest secrets, but there's levels to this. So maybe you have one person who's just like, that's my person who I can roll eyes with in the staff meeting. You know,
Yep.
that's my person that I can sit with in the break room. That's
Mhm.
my person that I'm having dinner with on the weekend. That's my person who I'm going to invite to my kid's birthday party. So don't, you know, overestimate how things have to be, you know, look like in my childhood, it was like everybody felt like family, you know, but that's not the world we live in today. And so as we start to look at how can I heal from burnout? How can I protect myself from burnout? I really do think it is about kind of thinking outside of the box. And then,
Yeah.
you know, I think that's one of those, again, one of those places where having a professional who is not, who didn't grow up the same way you grew up to help you kind of think through some of those things can be helpful, because you start telling your family you're getting ready to go to a running club. They're like, what? Why would you do
Right. Why are you going to
yeah.
that?
So having somebody who's like, I think that's cool for you. I can't wait to hear how that works for you.
Yeah.
That level of support is really a benefit.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that because I feel like a lot of times we think that the solution to burnout is to do nothing, which
Mm,
is not realistic for everybody because
right.
sometimes you'll have the burnout and then when you do nothing, you just feel the heaviness of the burnout of all
Right.
the emotions and the feelings, right? So the purpose of you kind of limiting being a yes man to everybody and involving yourself in all these different activities and doing all these different things that are burning you out, the purpose of that is for you to fulfill yourself and fulfill yourself and pencil in stuff into your schedule that's going to allow you to feel those pleasant emotions. So
Yeah.
like you mentioned, like the joy and the happiness, different things like that, those are emotions that you want to lean into and
Yeah.
hold on to. And when you start to experience those emotions and those feelings that are pleasant, then that kind of cancels out the unwanted and unpleasant feelings and emotions that you were experiencing because of the burnout. So it's not always about not doing nothing. It's just about you doing what is valuable to you versus what's valuable to others.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a good point. So we've talked a lot about burnout and how to kind of recover, but just in case somebody's like on the fence, like, I'm okay, I'm fine, you know, what happens, and you can speak about the mental part or the physical part, when you don't address it. Like burnout isn't a diagnosis, but when you are literally burnt out and, you know, not doing anything to actively recover from that, what happens over time? Like what's the worst case scenario?
Yeah, so every choice has a consequence. So and a lot of times, like we've talked about many of times, you'll be able to identify that something is off within yourself. You'll be able to identify that you're super tired, that you're fatigued, and that you are experiencing burnout, but you're just choosing to not do anything about it, right? So if you're not going to do anything about it, then what's the purpose of you even identifying and addressing it in the first place? Because it's not doing you any justice. Like you just know that it's there, right? That's just like me identifying it's a sore on me somewhere, but I'm not going to go to the doctor or treat it or anything like that. So the wound kind of just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Then it gets infected. And then it may get to the point where my arm got to be amputated because I didn't address this small little sore. And the same thing happens when it comes to burnout and these mental health concerns that we see that are kind of directly linked to burnout. So the feelings of anxiety and signs and symptoms of depression, different things like that. If you choose to not address that, you just fall at a greater risk of experiencing those things that are related to anxiety and depression. And when you start to experience those things and you're not addressing that on top of not addressing the burnout, it'll start to affect your productivity when it comes to how you're showing up at work. Like you said earlier, sometimes we're so burnt out because of the things that we're doing outside of our homes. We get home and we don't even have the capacity or the patience or the grace to not, I hate to use the word deal, because it's like, if you got to come home and deal with your husband and your family, are you happy? That's a whole conversation for another thing. But if you are doing all these things outside of the home, which is what's caused you to be burnt out, and then you come home and you're short tempered and you have no patience with your husband or with your family or your significant other, and maybe some males on here as well. So if you're experiencing those things, then that goes to show that you are choosing to, again, suppress. And if you're going to continue to suppress, you're going to continue to be burnt out. You're going to continue to explode and have the anger, the irritability, the frustration. Some of the other things that may be affected is your lack of sleep, right? We know that people who have an increase in anxiety symptoms, they have sometimes difficulty falling asleep or difficulty staying asleep, right? So it'll affect your sleep schedule. Like I said earlier, it'll affect your productivity and how you're showing up at work. It'll affect your desire to even engage in any activity at all, because again, it goes back to you feeling as if, okay, I'm already burnt out, so I just need to do nothing.
Right.
And once burnout sets in and you're choosing to not address it, I feel like the number one thing that we see within people who are in the beginning stages of depression is their inability to address that they are self-isolating. And because it gets to the point where it's just like, okay, I'm sad, I don't feel like doing this, I don't want to be bothered, I'm gonna just stay in my bed. No, get up. Let's get on up, because we're not doing that. Get up. Right now, sometimes, granted, you have to allow yourself to just sit there. So I'm not saying just ignore what you're feeling in that moment, but if you are somebody that is in the stages of experiencing burnout and also in the beginning stages of experiencing depression, self-isolating is the worst thing that you can do to yourself, because you need to be around community. You need to be around people that are going to be able to identify that something is off within yourself, because a lot of times when these signs and symptoms come up within ourselves, because we're so stressed, because we're so fatigued, like, it's difficult for us to kind of navigate through them.
Right.
And us isolating ourselves does not allow us to be around the people that love us, that care about us, that value us, that can help us to address and identify, like, yeah, something is off with me. I've had an increase in like sadness. I've been overextending myself, all of those different things. And even when we think about some of the health concerns that can come from being burnt out, and stress is something that is a direct symptom of being burnt out, right? Absolutely. And when we think about the African American community, like, we're the highest rate of people that experience heart disease and different things like that. So it's like we allow ourselves to get to the point where we don't want to say no to things and people, and we put our own physical health at risk.
Absolutely.
Why do we need to allow things to get to the extreme before we address something? It doesn't have to get to the extreme. I don't have to go to the doctor and he tell me I got heart problems. Just address what is stressing you out and causing you to be burnt out in that moment, so you don't have to have these long-term health effects from it.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, because sometimes we don't acknowledge these things. Like, and then when you kind of reflect back, you're like, oh,
Like, why
that did, I was tired. I have been having headaches. You're like, but because we haven't taken the time to kind of do that reflection, which again brings us back to the benefit of having somebody to check in with. And I don't want to just say that has to be a coach or a therapist, but if you don't have somebody in your circle, or if your people in your circle are struggling too, it can be, right? The other thing that came up when you were talking is I think people need to understand that there's different types of rest.
Oh, absolutely.
So we oftentimes think about rest as just like doing nothing, which is totally fine. But there's also like an active rest where you are replenishing yourself and recharging yourself and renewing yourself. I was kind of looking at my phone, it's like, okay, so if I just said, you know what, my battery's dying, I'm just gonna put my phone down. my battery's not getting charged because I put
Right,
my phone down. If I
right.
don't plug that phone into the wall at some point, it's not going to get recharged. So when we're talking about rest, which is part of how you can kind of recover from that burnout, sometimes sitting just sitting down is exactly what you need to do, but sometimes you do need to plug in with someone or something. And when you're talking about that isolation, I see that a lot because we start to get frustrated with people. Everything feels like it's more energy than it's even worth, and we
Yep.
don't recognize those signs in ourselves. And so I think when we have kind of these kind of global signs and symptoms, but it is important to pay attention to your own individual signs and symptoms. So
Absolutely.
sometimes those things are going to be a little bit different for you as an individual. And someone who loves you, someone who knows you, sometimes can see those a little bit earlier than even you can.
Mhm.
Because they're like, ooh. I remember one time years and years ago, it was when I was a stay-at-home mom for just a brief moment. I remember I was on the phone with my sister, and she's like, you seem to be yelling a lot. And I'm like, am I? I am. Like, I am. And I didn't really think, and at the time I didn't really think about, I was under a lot of stress, but I really hadn't caught myself and I wasn't aware of that. And so she just, and it wasn't like, she wasn't checking me or nothing. She just like, you just seem to be yelling a lot. It's kind of like, do you notice you're yelling?
Yeah.
But because sometimes we don't pay attention to that, and sometimes your kids will tell you that too. They'll be like, Mom,
Like you doing a
like,
lot.
but it's because people have a different perspective.
Mhm.
And when you're inside of it, sometimes you don't really realize that having that extra perspective can be so, so beneficial. And so, whether that is somebody in your circle, somebody in your community, somebody in your home, somebody in your neighborhood, whatever that may be, it really can be a benefit to you
Okay.
because over time, I've read various studies that talk about how stress is like, this silent epidemic that we have normalized in our culture. That really is, if you look at some of the root causes of the most common diseases, very often is due to stress and trauma. And those things also contribute to burnout. So if we really get clear and honest about what we're experiencing and make sure that we don't let things get out of hand, I think that can be really helpful.
Yeah. And I think that is why it's so vital for us to know what our capacities are. Because a lot of times, like you said, everybody's perception of you is different. And a lot of times we get frustrated and irritated with people for continuously asking us, can you do this? Can you give me that? Can you show up for this? Like we're frustrated with them for doing that, but they perceive us in the way of being able to do it because that's how we're choosing to show up in their life.
You better stop that. No, you better stop it. You're
So
stepping
it's
on somebody's toes right now.
So it's like, how can you be upset with them when all you've done is shown them over and over again that regardless of what I got going on, I'm gonna do this for you no matter what. You can always call on me. I'm always be here for you no matter what's going on with me. Like you don't gotta ask me how I'm doing. So I can't be mad and frustrated because you're not asking me how my day went. I can't be mad and frustrated because you're constantly asking me to do this for you or give you this and that. Because at the end of the day, you gave them the permission to be able to talk to you that way. You gave them the permission to be able to ask you to show up in this way. It was you. And
Yep.
it starts with self accountability. And a
Mhm.
lot of times we don't want to take accountability when it comes to us experiencing the heaviness of burnout or stress because we want to point the finger at other people. And it's like, no, they didn't put a gun up to your head and tell you to say yes.
Yeah. And I
Like
think
that's
part
just
of that is we want to be rescued. We want somebody to like come in and fix it. But I always say you can't be mad at somebody for not respecting a boundary that you never set. Because you
yeah,
didn't set it. So
absolutely.
if you didn't set it, they don't have to. You're thinking like, well, they should. Well, why don't they know? Why don't they
You
understand?
didn't say it,
You didn't say
honey. You didn't say it.
it. You don't hardly want to acknowledge it yourself. Why should they? We look.
Mhm.
We all just gonna be blind. We all gonna
Literally.
pretend like we don't see
Look,
what's
I don't know
going
what's going
on.
on.
You don't see it. I don't see it neither. And so that, but again, that I think sometimes that goes back to that cultural narrative. And I talk about this a lot with parents because there's this motif that moms are supposed to be self-sacrificing. They're supposed to always give for their kids. You're not supposed to say no. I love my mama. She never let me down. Why is that? She should. She should let you
Right.
down because sometimes you're like, unless she's a machine, like why is that the expectation? If
Mhm.
everybody once you become a parent, suddenly you're expected to never let anybody down, never make a mistake, never fall flat. That's not real. So
Not
every
really.
time we
No.
set these expectations where this person is just all, she's my mama ride or die. No, I'm a regular human being. I am flawed. I have made mistakes. I will apologize when I do something that is harmful or what have you, but I'm a human being. And
Yeah.
so we have to normalize these conversations around like, no, it's not ideal for or even expected for you to be on all the time. You
Yeah.
absolutely can't say, no, I'm off. I can't do that. That's too
Yeah.
much. That's okay. And that doesn't mean you don't love your kid. It doesn't mean you're not a good mom because I think sometimes that guilt is the perfect like gasoline to the fire to burn you right on out. So we had to have that conversation too.
Yep. And I think the question, I was writing something down here. The question that kind of like went through my mind was we have to ask ourselves, what are the vital things that I need to keep my sanity and my humanity? Because at the end of the day, like you said, we are all humans. Aside from the titles that we carry, the job descriptions, the being the mom, the dad, the coach, the therapist, the pastor, no
Mhm.
matter what you are, at the end of the day, you are a human. And if you are neglecting the common things, the basic needs, right? Looking at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Right, right,
when we negate those basic needs, that means that we are not valuing our humanity. We're
right.
just not. And like you said, we are not machines. Like we cannot just go, go, go and expect to never be burnt out. Because if we're being completely honest, even machines need tweaking and rest at times.
Absolutely.
So you
Absolutely.
can identify yourself to be a machine, but at the end of the day, eventually you're gonna need some tweaking and you're gonna need some resting.
Yeah,
So go ahead and do it and get into the routine of doing it as a preventative measure so the burnout does not happen.
absolutely. And you brought up a point. You bringing up the good stuff. When we were talking when you said like whether you're a pastor, I think it's important that we know certain people, certain professions, whether we're talking about clinicians, caregivers, social workers, moms, teachers, pastors, all these roles that we have identified of like you are superhuman, you are a giver, like you are a helper, all these roles, you are at a greater risk for burnout,
Mm-hmm.
which means you have to go even farther above and beyond to make sure that you're protected, that you have a protection plan where you're like, hey, here's my checklist of things. These are my non-negotiable. These are the things that I have to make sure this goes on my calendar before anything else.
Yep.
Uh, I don't believe that God calls us to sacrifice us. Like,
Oh,
look,
absolutely.
Jesus was on the cross already. He's not calling me to sacrifice myself. Okay. So
Uh-uh.
um, we have to be really, really clear about that because sometimes we put certain populations, like we technically put them on a pedestal, but it's like a pedestal full of thorns. So we
Literally.
put them up there like, oh, you love God, so you got to be up here doing this. But then, like, well, do God love me? Because if He loved me like He loved you, I'm supposed to be able to rest too. I'm supposed to be able to have that. And I think that that is not only um, something good for us on a natural sense, I think it's also good for us on a spiritual sense because if I'm saying I have to do it all, what am I dependent on God for?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But we have
And
to
I
be
think,
real clear about that.
yeah, and I think even speaking to the terms of our spirituality and our faith, Jesus himself rested too. So
Girl.
Jesus had to rest. What makes you think it's not important for me? That makes no sense. Like it just doesn't make sense. And I feel like a lot of times we we don't see the importance of making sure that we are identifying our mental being, our
Yeah.
spiritual being, and
Yeah.
our physical being. All of it is connected. And if one of them is affected in a negative way, the other one is going to begin to be affected as well. So
Absolutely.
it's vital for us to, and like you said, making sure that you are engaging in things that are going to replenish you. If you feel like you need to take a step back and be in your word, take a step back and go to your prayer closet, do all the things that you need to do to fill yourself up spiritually.
Yes.
So that way, because when you're filled up spiritually, then it will positively affect your thinking patterns, right?
Yes.
Your mental health. And then that'll also in turn affect your behaviors in a positive way. If you drain, you just literally have nothing to give. I can't pour from an empty cup. Like, I have nothing to give you. I'm spiritually drained, emotionally drained, mentally drained, physically drained. I don't have anything. So
Right.
again, it goes back to the question of what can I do? Where can I go? And who can I go to fill me back up again?
Absolutely. Ooh, this was such a good conversation. Oh my gosh, this was so good. So, okay. So as we are wrapping up, obviously we here at the Well, we have a variety of professionals who can help you. We have mental health counselors, we have addiction counselors, we have mental health coaches, we have licensed clinical social workers, we have psychologists. So we have a variety of people here who can help you if you are struggling with that burnout, looking for your path to recovery, looking for how you can have conversations with a spouse or a loved one so that you don't have to experience this burnout. So around this video somewhere will be links and contact information. But LaKeisha, if somebody is on the fence about like, can talking to a therapist really help me? I want you to talk directly to the woman in transition who realizes that maybe she has experienced some burnout. She's ready to start kind of bouncing back and feeling better. I want you to have just a quick, as we wrap up, what is your last thing you want to say to her to make sure that she knows that it is the right thing for her to do to reach out and put herself on her own to-do list and get in contact with a professional this week? How can you say something to her?
First thing that comes to my mind is the cycle ends here. You don't want to keep going through the same thing over and over again. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually, whatever it may be that you're struggling with, you don't want to continue to go through that again. If you've tried other options, they may have worked in some type of way, but they did not give you long-term results, right? You need somebody that's going to be able to hold you accountable, that's going to give you the safe space for you to be vocal about the things that you've experienced, that's going to make sure that you are staying committed to yourself and your goals. You need that. You need an accountability partner. And literally, there's nobody better to turn to other than a therapist. Because again, don't look at your therapist as if they are just this super smart clinical person and they got all these different degrees and these licenses and credentials. We are humans ourselves, right? And the good thing about sitting with a therapist is that you're able to be in front of someone that is human and has had life experiences and that also has the clinical and educational background to help you make sense of what you've experienced and give you practical tools and tips to get to where you're trying to go.
Absolutely. Perfect. 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 All right. So we are super excited to have had this conversation. We will be back. Like I said, we are super excited to be talking about relevant real life topics that also relate to your mental health. Burnout is one of those. There is absolutely help. Recovery from burnout is totally possible. Even if you are feeling completely burnout right now today, it is absolutely possible to feel better. Even if it feels like going to the therapist, making that move, rearranging your schedule, it just feels like one more thing to do. I promise you, the things that move you closer to healing absolutely are beneficial. We also have the wonderful benefit of having a lot of different options here for you as far as payment is concerned here at the Well. We are so proud to have partnered with the Redeemer Presbyterian Church with their 4-H fund, which means that you can apply and receive a partial or even a full scholarship for your counseling sessions with LaKeisha. We also have other options like care credit. We are in network with lots of different insurance companies. So if you need some support, we are here and we cannot wait to help you. Reach out to us at 317-471-8996. You can also view our website at thewellcounselinggroup.com, where you can kind of check out the profiles. We want you to be able to get connected with your therapist, or connected with your coach to kind of see who they are and a little bit about them, their background. So you can see all of our professionals on our website, so you can see a little bit about them and how they are ready to help you. So we will be back to see you guys again soon. Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you leave a comment. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure that you are subscribed to the page, because we put out good stuff. If you are watching this on Facebook, make sure that you leave a comment. Let us know something that was helpful for you. Share it with a friend to make sure this conversation goes far and wide. And we want to thank you guys so much, and we'll see you again soon.